tape, that changes the whole nature of this information. And that changes the whole commitment required of the young people in all of these tribes if all you have to do to preserve an oral tradition is push the record and the go button, what do you call it, forward button simultaneously. So, I don't know why I told her that. Where am I? Oh, I don't think our cause is helped by sweeping overstatements and impossible to verify claims of 10 minutes. Jeez, the guy's brutal. Overstatements about Indian knowledge. Let me give you an example. I don't believe in witchcraft. A lot of Indian people believe in witchcraft. I don't. If somebody says that's part of the body of Indian knowledge, I have to say, not for me. I don't care what people believe. That's my example of something that is in the area of information we might want to record as how people live and what they think and what they believe. But then to say that is not only Indian knowledge, but it's superior to anything that white Western science has, I think that weakens our case. And I think that overstatements weaken our case. Overstatements about the sins of Western science weaken our case. And in fact, if it is and that was part of the problem with the research conferences in the early years, was that they could afford to applaud because nothing important was really being challenged. They weren't really being threatened at all. And in fact, as long as the Indian case for the Indian side and critique of the Western science side was so sloppy, it made them realize, hell, we got another 20 years to coast on the power we have now before these guys figure out how to really hurt us. And so they could afford to say, oh, by golly, absolutely. The smallest tribe should be doing all that kidney research that Johns Hopkins is being paid for now. Because they know tribes are not going to get that kind of money. They don't have the infrastructure. So it costs you absolutely nothing to say, yeah, yep, tribes should be doing it. And if we fall into that trap, then we are complicit in our own continued powerlessness. And I guess that's an important thing, and maybe since this man is looking at me very sternly, that's one message I want to leave with you is we have to have the strongest possible position, and the people who are sent away to school and trained in articulating these things in the language that science can understand cannot see themselves as the ones who should lead in the imprecise statements of what our position is. I went through many years of the rhetoric of community participation in research and community control and all of this, and I realized all we were doing was changing the language that people put in proposals. What are the new, there are applause lines and there are proposal buzzword lines. And people who write the proposals have to put things in the proposal promising some measure of community participation in the research that is sufficiently vague that nobody will ever know whether they did it or not. Tribes don't know how to cash in on it, but they will have convinced everybody in the field, oh boy, we're talking about community partnerships and all of this. There are some fundamental things that, another family characteristic, we're given to overstatement or misstatement. In my case, at least, I overstate sometimes and misstate so that people will say, well, that's not right, and when they think about why what I said is not right, they understand better what it was I was trying to say. There's a fundamental thing we can't lose sight of, and that is something is either true or it's not true, which is different from whether we know it to be true. You know that Rumsfeld, my countryman, the guy who lives down in New Mexico now, he said something, one thing that was very interesting, that's actually a very useful concept. Remember his concept of known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and everybody made fun of him for that, but actually it's something we need to think about. There are things that you know, and let's assume for the moment that everything you know, you think you know, you actually know. The things that you don't know, and you wish you knew, you try to figure out how to get that information. But the unknown unknowns are things that you don't know, you should know, and you don't even know that they exist, so you don't know to ask them. That's a really useful concept. So we have an assertion is either true or it's not. That's an overstatement, but it's a more helpful overstatement than having people talk about the superiority of Indian knowledge to other people's knowledge. That's just a totally meaningless statement. It is useful, there's a useful distinction in the law between substance and procedure. Substance is the law itself. Here are the elements of a contract. Here's the elements of a particular felony. Here are the elements of a tort. You got to do this defining legal concepts. Procedure is, here's how you get into court. Here's how you stay in court. Here's how you introduce evidence. And when you take a procedure course, the professor spends a lot of time saying, now here's a question, is it a substantive question or a procedural question? The people who are overpaid in the academy to come up with all these new applause lines and buzz lines have to address clearly, what are you complaining about the substance of Western science? That is, it hadn't been done that great, and they've been racist, and they've been narrow-minded, and they've been short-sighted. That's the substance. That is what they've produced. Or are you concerned about the procedure? I was listening yesterday, and it struck me, what's the source of Indian knowledge? Is it revelation, or is it observation? What do we believe is this? Some Indian knowledge we believe is a revelation. It's a revelation from certain beings that we have a relationship with, and they come and tell us, go look there and go do this and go do that. We're not the only people who believe in revelation. I don't have a problem believing in revelation, what I wonder about is, because some of that information is true, the people that we talk to, the creatures that we talk to come and say, if you do this, then that will happen, and we're going to happen. Now, if I were a cynic, or if I want to get in trouble, I would say, well, that's a story that they tell. It really comes from centuries of observation, and all knowledge comes from observation. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it's a way of thinking about it. It is important because we cannot assert the superiority of our view of natural things, our science, it seems to me, unless we address for our own purposes and for the other people we're trying to persuade. And we are trying to persuade other people, if only in a proposal to get funded. If we're serious about what we're saying, we want to talk about the serious things and not some patronizing, oh hell, doesn't matter, give them the money, they'll go away and they'll stop with the applause. I don't want money on this term. How do you verify an assertion from an Indian person that something is true, something is the case about the natural world? Because that's one of the elements of Western science, verifying, this guy says this, and it's either true or it's not. I don't think we can go much farther in this knowledge business until we address that question. And I don't think it is helpful to say to Indian communities, Indian tribes and Indian communities, you need to protect yourself from research